The summons. The alarm system at the Deep Space Monitoring Station in Antarctica had been silent for 43 years. When it finally activated at 0347 hours on a frozen August morning, Dr. Marcus Chen thought it was a malfunction. He was wrong. The signal that appeared on his screens was like nothing he had ever seen. It pulsed with mathematical precision, carrying patterns that could only be intentional, could only be intelligent, and could only be coming from somewhere beyond the solar system. Marcus had spent his entire adult life searching for this moment. He had devoted decades to scanning the cosmos for any sign that humanity was not alone in the universe. Now, at 67 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes, he sat frozen in his chair as the impossible became real. His hands trembled as he reached for the emergency communication line. Within minutes, every major government on Earth knew that first contact had arrived. The signal was not a greeting. It was a summons. The translation software that Earth's best linguists and computer scientists had developed over the following 72 hours revealed a message both simple and terrifying. Humanity had been observed. Humanity had been evaluated from a distance. And now humanity was required to send a representative to the Nexus Assembly, a gathering of galactic civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. The message made it clear that this was not optional. A vessel would arrive at the International Space Station in 14 days. One human would travel to answer for the entire species. The emergency session of the United Nations was unlike anything in history. Every nation sent its highest-ranking officials. The debate raged for 3 days straight. Who could possibly speak for all of humanity? Who had the wisdom, the courage, and the strength to face unknown alien civilizations? Some argued for a scientist who could demonstrate human knowledge. Others insisted on a philosopher who could explain human values. Many wanted a politician skilled in negotiation and compromise. Admiral Sarah Mitchell was not anyone's first choice. At 51 years old, she had spent 30 years in naval service, rising through ranks during peacetime through sheer competence and unshakable integrity. She had negotiated treaties, resolved international incidents, and earned respect from allies and adversaries alike. She was known for three things: her ability to remain calm in crisis situations, her refusal to compromise on matters of principle, and her habit of saying exactly what she meant without decoration or diplomacy. When the Secretary General proposed her name, the room fell silent. Then, slowly, delegates began to nod. Sarah accepted the assignment without hesitation. She had one request: she would bring Dr. Raj Patel as her technical advisor. Raj was 34 years old, a quantum physicist who had made breakthrough discoveries in energy manipulation. He was also Sarah's nephew by marriage, and she trusted him completely. More importantly, Raj had the kind of mind that could understand alien technology quickly. If they were walking into a situation where knowledge meant survival, Raj would be essential. The alien vessel arrived exactly when promised. It appeared without warning in orbit near the International Space Station, visible to every telescope on Earth and to millions of people watching their screens in wonder and fear. The ship was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. It seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, reflecting light in colors that human eyes had never seen before. It was roughly the size of a football stadium, but sensors indicated that most of its mass existed in dimensions that human instruments could not properly measure. Sarah and Raj launched from Cape Canaveral on a specially prepared shuttle. As they approached the alien vessel, a portal opened in its side, perfect and seamless, large enough to accommodate their entire shuttle. Sarah piloted them inside, her hands steady on the controls despite the strangeness of everything around them. The shuttle settled onto a landing platform that seemed to grow from the floor to meet them. When they opened the hatch, breathable air and comfortable temperature greeted them. Someone or something had prepared for human visitors. A voice spoke in perfect English, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. It introduced itself as the ship's intelligence, not quite artificial and not quite alive, something in between that human language had no words to describe. It told them that the journey to the Nexus Assembly would take 3 weeks. It offered them quarters, food, and access to information about the galactic community they were about to join. Sarah noticed that it said join, not meet, as if the decision had already been made. The quarters were more comfortable than Sarah had expected. The ship had somehow analyzed human needs and created spaces that felt almost familiar. There were beds that adjusted to their bodies, food that appeared when they were hungry, and screens that displayed information when they wanted to learn. Raj spent hours every day studying everything the ship would tell him about galactic technology. Sarah spent her time differently. She asked about history, about politics, about how the galactic community actually functioned. What she learned troubled her deeply. The Nexus Assembly consisted of 12 dominant species who had achieved faster-than-light travel thousands of years ago. They had established what they called the Galactic Order, a system of laws and hierarchies that governed hundreds of worlds. Young species like humanity were assessed when they reached a certain level of technology. Based on that assessment, they were assigned a role in galactic society. Some became laborers, some became traders, some became soldiers. The ship's intelligence insisted this system had brought stability and peace to the galaxy for millennia. Sarah asked the question that mattered most. What happened to species that refused their assigned role? The ship's intelligence was silent for a long moment. Then it said simply that such refusals were rare. Very rare. And those who refused were taught the error of their ways. Sarah did not ask how. She did not need to. She understood perfectly what the ship was telling her. The Galactic Order maintained peace through power, through the threat of overwhelming force against anyone who challenged the system. During the third week of the journey, Raj made a discovery that changed everything. He had been analyzing the ship's energy systems, trying to understand how it achieved faster-than-light travel. What he found was that the technology was not as advanced as everyone assumed. It was old, thousands of years old, refined and perfected but not fundamentally changed in all that time. The galactic civilizations had stopped innovating. They had found a system that worked, and they had stopped pushing boundaries, stopped asking dangerous questions, stopped dreaming of something better. Sarah and Raj sat together in the observation room, watching stars stream past at impossible speeds. Raj explained his findings, his voice quiet but urgent. These civilizations were ancient and powerful, but they were also stagnant. They had achieved stability by sacrificing growth. They had created peace by eliminating change. And now they wanted to fit humanity into that same frozen system, to assign humans a role and make sure they never tried to be anything more. Sarah looked at her nephew and saw the fire in his eyes that she recognized in herself. She thought about Earth, about humanity's chaotic and violent history, about all the wars and suffering and mistakes. But she also thought about humanity's art and music, about scientific discoveries and acts of courage, about people who had looked at impossible problems and refused to accept defeat. Humanity had never been peaceful or orderly or stable. But humanity had also never stopped growing, never stopped changing, never stopped reaching for something higher. The ship's intelligence informed them that they would arrive at the Nexus Assembly in 6 hours. Sarah asked for privacy to prepare. She stood alone in her quarters, looking at her reflection in the polished wall. She had been chosen to speak for humanity, to represent 8 billion people who had no idea their future was being decided by aliens they had never met. The weight of that responsibility should have crushed her. Instead, she felt something else. She felt ready. The Nexus Assembly Station appeared in the viewports, and Sarah understood why they called it that. The structure was massive beyond comprehension, a sphere of crystalline materials and flowing energy that held artificial gravity and atmosphere for thousands of different species. Ships of every size and shape moved around it like fish in an ocean. The alien vessel carrying Sarah and Raj slipped into a docking bay, and the ship's intelligence told them it was time. They were escorted through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past beings that looked nothing like humans, some beautiful and some terrifying and some simply incomprehensible. Sarah kept her head high and her face calm, giving away nothing of what she felt inside. Raj walked beside her, his scientific mind cataloging everything they saw, his hands steady despite the fear she knew he must be feeling. The assembly hall was designed to intimidate. It was a vast circular chamber with a domed ceiling that showed the stars above. 12 platforms rose around the edges, each one holding representatives from the dominant species. At the center was a small circular stage, isolated and exposed, where Sarah and Raj would stand alone before the judgment of civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. The architect spoke first. It was a being of pure crystalline structure, towering and ancient, its voice resonating through the chamber without any visible effort. It welcomed them with words that sounded courteous but felt cold. It explained that humanity had been observed for 7 decades, since humans first split the atom and sent radio signals into space. It said that the Council had studied human history, human culture, and human nature. And now it was time for humanity to answer questions and accept its place in the galactic community. Sarah stepped forward onto that small stage. She looked up at the 12 platforms surrounding her, at beings who had existed for millennia, who commanded technologies beyond human imagination, who held the power to destroy Earth with barely an effort. She felt Raj beside her, felt the weight of 8 billion lives resting on her shoulders. And she felt something else, something that had burned in humanity since the first human looked at the sky and wondered what lay beyond. She felt fire. And she knew that before this was over, the entire galaxy would feel it too. The declaration. The questioning began immediately. The architect gestured with one crystalline limb, and a holographic display materialized in the air above Sarah and Raj. Images from Earth's history appeared, flickering through centuries in seconds. Ancient battles, medieval wars, industrial revolution, world wars, nuclear explosions, environmental destruction. The gallery of human failure played out for everyone to see. A voice came from one of the platforms, belonging to a creature that resembled flowing water given form and consciousness. It called itself the Keeper of Records. Its voice was like waves breaking on distant shores, beautiful and sad at the same time. It spoke of humanity's violence, listing conflicts by century, calculating deaths by the millions. It showed graphs of species extinction, forests destroyed, oceans polluted. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. Sarah watched the display without flinching. She had expected this. Every species probably went through the same process, having their worst moments displayed and judged by civilizations that had long forgotten their own bloody histories. She waited until the keeper finished speaking, until the images faded and silence filled the chamber. Then she spoke for the first time since entering the hall. Her voice was calm and clear, carrying to every corner of that vast space. She acknowledged everything they had shown. Yes, humanity had fought terrible wars. Yes, humans had destroyed parts of their own planet. Yes, human history was full of cruelty and suffering and mistakes that could never be undone. She did not make excuses or try to minimize the truth. Instead, she asked a simple question. Did the Council believe that humanity was unique in this regard? The architect tilted its massive head, light refracting through its crystalline body. It admitted that no, humanity was not unique. Every species had a violent past. Every civilization had made mistakes during its development. This was expected, even normal. But most species outgrew their violence gradually, over tens of thousands of years. Humanity had compressed that entire process into a few thousand years, developing technology far faster than wisdom. This made humans dangerous, unpredictable, a threat to the stability that the galactic order had maintained for so long. Another voice joined the conversation. This one came from a reptilian being covered in scales that shifted between green and gold. It identified itself as Commander Thask of the Enforcement Fleet. Its voice was harsh, aggressive, the sound of something that had spent millennia as a predator and still remembered those instincts. Thask spoke of military power, of weapons capacity, of humanity's disturbing tendency to innovate warfare faster than any other aspect of civilization. Thask noted that humans had achieved nuclear weapons within decades of achieving powered flight. No other species in galactic records had done that. Raj stepped forward for the first time, his voice respectful but firm. He explained that human technological development was driven by necessity and curiosity in equal measure. Yes, humans had developed terrible weapons, but they had also developed medicine that saved billions of lives, technology that fed populations, systems of communication that connected the entire species. The weapons existed because humans lived in a universe they did not understand, filled with potential threats they could not predict. Now that humanity knew they were not alone, now that they understood there was a galactic community, perhaps those weapons would become unnecessary. A sound like laughter echoed through the chamber, but it was not friendly. It came from a being that appeared to be made of shadows and starlight, something that existed partially in dimensions human eyes could not fully perceive. It called itself the Observer, and it had been watching humanity longer than any other council member. The Observer spoke of human nature, of territorial instincts and tribal thinking that humanity had never truly overcome. Humans still divided themselves into nations, religions, ideologies. They still fought over resources and ideas. They still feared those who were different from themselves. The Observer's words cut deeper than the others because they were harder to deny. Sarah felt the truth in them, felt the weight of human history pressing down on her. But she also felt something else rising inside her, something that had been building since they entered this chamber. It was anger, cold and focused, the kind of anger that came from being judged by those who refused to see the whole picture. She interrupted the Observer mid-sentence, her voice sharp enough to cut through the shadows. She asked the council a direct question. In 12,000 years of galactic peace and stability, what had they achieved? What great problems had they solved? What dreams had they pursued? The chamber fell silent, shocked by her tone, by her audacity to question them. Sarah pressed forward. She pointed out that the ship's technology that brought her here was thousands of years old. The Nexus assembly station used the same fundamental designs it had used for millennia. The galactic community had achieved stability by stopping all meaningful progress, by assigning roles and making sure no one ever stepped outside their designated place. They had created peace by eliminating ambition, by crushing anyone who wanted something more than what they were given. The architect's voice boomed through the chamber, angry now for the first time. It accused Sarah of arrogance, of presuming to judge civilizations that had existed since before human ancestors walked upright. It reminded her that humanity had achieved nothing compared to the galactic community, that humans were children playing with dangerous toys, that the council's patience had limits. Sarah met the architect's gaze without fear. She acknowledged that humanity was young and inexperienced. She admitted that humans had made terrible mistakes and would probably make more in the future. But she refused to accept that youth was the same as worthlessness, or that inexperience meant humanity had nothing to offer. Human history was violent and chaotic because humans had never stopped fighting for something better. Every war had eventually led to peace. Every mistake had eventually led to learning. Humanity grew through conflict and emerged stronger every time. Another council member spoke, a being of pure energy contained in a geometric field. It called itself the mathematician, and it had calculated probability curves for humanity's future. According to every model, every simulation, humanity would either destroy itself within the next 500 years or become a dominant force that would destabilize the entire galactic order. The probabilities were roughly equal. The council could not allow such uncertainty to exist unchecked. The mathematician explained the verdict that the council had reached. Humanity would be placed under protective quarantine. This meant that Earth and the entire solar system would be isolated from the rest of the galaxy. No human ships would be permitted to develop faster-than-light capability. No human vessels would be allowed to leave the solar system. A monitoring station would be established on Mars with enough firepower to destroy Earth if humans attempted to break quarantine. This arrangement would last for a minimum of 10,000 years, giving humanity time to mature under controlled conditions. The words fell like stones into deep water. Sarah felt Raj stiffen beside her, felt her own heart hammering in her chest. 10,000 years. 200 generations. Longer than all of recorded human history. The Council was proposing to cage humanity forever, to lock 8 billion people and all their descendants in a prison made of their own solar system, watched over by alien wardens who would kill them if they tried to leave. The architect asked if Sarah understood the verdict. Its voice had returned to that courteous coldness, as if the matter was already settled and they were simply explaining details. The Council was giving humanity a gift, it said. Many species in humanity's position would have been eliminated entirely. This quarantine was mercy, a chance for humans to prove they could control their violent instincts before being allowed to join galactic society. Sarah looked around the chamber at the 12 species who had judged humanity and found them wanting. She thought about Earth, about cities full of people who would never know how close they had come to annihilation. She thought about children who would grow up never knowing the stars, about scientists who would spend their lives developing technology they would never be allowed to use, about explorers who would dream of distant worlds they would never reach. She thought about her grandmother, who had survived a war and told Sarah stories about courage in the face of impossible odds. She thought about her brother, who had died young but had always believed that humanity was destined for something greater. She thought about Raj standing beside her, brilliant and brave, representing the best of what humanity could become. And she felt that fire again, burning hotter than before. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped to the edge of the platform. When she spoke, her voice was quiet at first, but it grew stronger with every word. She thanked the Council for their consideration. She acknowledged their power and their experience. She recognized that they believed they were acting in humanity's best interest. Then she rejected their verdict absolutely and completely. The chamber exploded into chaos. Voices shouted in a dozen languages, translated into cacophony by the systems that had maintained order moments before. The architect demanded silence, its crystalline body flashing with angry light. Commander Thask rose from its platform, scales rippling with aggression. The observers' shadows grew darker and more menacing. Sarah waited for the noise to subside. She had their attention now, all of it, focused on her like a weapon. She explained calmly that humanity had not asked for the Council's permission to exist. Humans had not requested assessment or judgment. The Council had observed humanity from a distance and made decisions without ever speaking to a single human, without ever trying to understand what drove humanity forward despite all the violence and chaos. She told them about human history that the observer had missed. She spoke of people who had sacrificed everything to help strangers, of scientists who had pursued knowledge despite persecution, of artists who had created beauty in the midst of horror. She described humans who had fought against slavery, who had stood up to tyrants, who had looked at injustice and said no with their final breath. She explained that yes, humanity was violent and flawed and dangerous. But humanity was also capable of extraordinary compassion, creativity, and courage. The mathematician interrupted with cold logic. Individual examples did not matter. Statistics determined reality, and the statistics said humanity was too unstable to be trusted with freedom. Sarah smiled grimly at that. She asked if the mathematician had calculated the probability of humanity accepting permanent imprisonment. She asked if those models accounted for what humans did when their freedom was threatened. The answer was obvious from the silence that followed. The Council had not considered that possibility because in their experience, species accepted the verdicts they were given. Young civilizations recognized their place in the galactic hierarchy and submitted to the wisdom of their elders. Resistance was not just futile, it was unthinkable. Sarah explained that the Council had made a fundamental error in understanding humanity. They had studied human warfare and seen violence. They had examined human technology and seen danger. But they had missed the most important thing about humans. Throughout all of history, whenever anyone had tried to take away human freedom, humans had fought back. It did not matter if they were outnumbered. It did not matter if they faced certain death. Humans fought because freedom was more valuable than survival, because dignity was more important than safety. Commander Thask snarled that this was foolish pride, that humanity possessed no weapons that could threaten the enforcement fleet, that resistance would result in extinction. Sarah looked directly at the reptilian commander and spoke with absolute conviction. She told Thask that humans had faced extinction before and survived. She explained that humanity had been conquered by empires that no longer existed, had been threatened by weapons that were now museum pieces, had been told repeatedly throughout history that resistance was futile. And humans were still here. She painted a picture for the council of what would happen if they tried to enforce their quarantine. Humans would smile and nod and appear to cooperate. But every day, in laboratories and workshops and garages across Earth, humans would be studying the monitoring station. They would be analyzing its technology, finding its weaknesses, developing countermeasures. Humans would not rest until they found a way to break free, and then they would come boiling out of the solar system like a force of nature that had been compressed and contained too long. The observer asked quietly if Sarah was threatening the council. Sarah shook her head. She was not threatening anyone. She was simply stating facts. The council could choose to work with humanity as partners and allies, or they could choose to make humanity their enemy. But they could not choose to make humanity accept permanent subjugation. That option did not exist. The architect rose to its full height, towering over the chamber. It declared that Sarah was being irrational, that she was allowing emotion to override logic, that she was condemning her entire species to destruction. The council had the power to destroy Earth completely. If humans would not accept mercy, they would face justice instead. Sarah felt Raj trembling beside her, felt the weight of billions of lives hanging on her next words. She thought about backing down, about accepting the quarantine and hoping that someday, somehow, humanity would be freed. But she knew that was a lie. 10,000 years was forever. Accepting the cage now meant accepting it permanently. She raised her head and spoke her final words to the Galactic Council. On behalf of the United Earth Government and every human being who had ever lived or would ever live, she formally rejected the Council's authority over humanity. She declared that any attempt to establish a monitoring station in human space would be treated as an act of war. She warned that any ships entering the solar system without permission would be fired upon. She promised that humanity would never stop fighting for freedom, not in 10,000 years, not in 1,000,000 years, not ever. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Sarah looked around at the 12 species who ruled the galaxy, meeting their eyes one by one. Then she delivered her declaration. Humanity was going to the stars. Humans would build ships and explore the galaxy and meet other species on their own terms. They would do it with the Council's blessing or without it, as partners or as enemies, but they would do it. Nothing in the universe could stop them. She turned and walked toward the exit, Raj at her side. Behind them, the Galactic Council sat in stunned disbelief. The observer's voice followed them out, quiet and thoughtful. It said that the Council had never met a species quite like humanity before. Sarah paused at the doorway and looked back. She replied that the Council had better get used to it. The universe was about to change. The ship that carried them back to Earth moved through space in silence. Sarah and Raj sat together in the observation room, watching the stars and thinking about what they had done. Raj asked if she thought they had any chance of surviving what was coming. Sarah admitted that she did not know. But she knew that humanity would face whatever came with courage and defiance and absolute refusal to surrender. As Earth grew larger in the viewport, Sarah recorded a message. It would be sent not just to humanity, but to every species in the galaxy, broadcast on frequencies that could not be blocked or ignored. She spoke simply and clearly. Humanity was coming to the stars. They would meet new civilizations and make new friends. They would share knowledge and culture and dreams. But they would do it as free beings, not as subjects or slaves or prisoners. And if the galaxy wanted to stop them, it would have to kill every last human. Even then, Sarah was not sure it would be enough. The ship delivered them to the International Space Station and departed without ceremony. Sarah and Raj transferred to a shuttle and descended to Earth, watching their blue and white planet growing closer. Somewhere up there in the darkness, the Galactic Council was making decisions about humanity's future. But down here on Earth, 8 billion humans would make their own choices. Sarah had gambled everything on one fundamental truth about her species. Humans had never accepted cages. They had broken every chain ever placed on them. They had overcome every obstacle ever put in their path. And they would do it again, no matter what the cost. The shuttle touched down at Cape Canaveral to crowds of people waiting to hear what had happened. Sarah stepped out into the sunlight and the noise and the hope and fear in all those faces. She had no idea if she had saved humanity or doomed them. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The galaxy would never be the same.